My name is Serafina. I'm 26 and 3 months ago I discovered something that shattered my entire family. It started at what should have been a celebratory dinner for my sister's engagement. Marcus, her fiancé, decided to humiliate me in front of everyone, making cruel jokes about my recent job loss and calling me the family disappointment. While everyone laughed, including my parents, I sat there in stunned silence. What they didn't know was that I'd already uncovered Marcus's devastating secret. One that would destroy not just his relationship with my sister, but expose the rot that had been festering in my family for years. Before we dive into this wild family revenge story, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you've ever felt like the family scapegoat, and don't forget to subscribe because this tale of sweet justice is about to get absolutely insane. Trust me, you'll want to see how karma came for everyone who laughed that night. Let me take you back to where this all began because the dinner was just the explosion. The real story started 2 weeks earlier. I'd been staying at my parents' house temporarily after losing my marketing job at a startup that went under. Everyone in my family treated it like I was some kind of failure, especially after my sister Emma landed her dream job as a pediatric nurse and got engaged to Marcus, this supposedly perfect guy who worked in finance. Marcus Richardson seemed like he had it all together. Expensive suits, luxury car, always picking up the check at family dinners. My parents absolutely adored him, constantly comparing him to my ex-boyfriends and not so subtly suggesting I should learn from Emma's choices. The golden child and her golden fiancé versus me, the perpetual disappointment. But here's where it gets interesting. I was using my dad's laptop to job hunt, since mine had crashed and I'd forgotten to log out of his email account from the previous day. When I opened the browser, his Gmail was still active, and that's when I saw it. An email thread between my dad and Marcus that made my blood run cold. The subject line read, "Investment opportunity, confidential." Curious and honestly a little bored, I clicked on it. What I found was a months-long conversation about Marcus convincing my dad to invest his entire retirement savings, over $300,000, into some cryptocurrency scheme that Marcus claimed was guaranteed to investing triple returns within 6 months. But that wasn't even the worst part. As I scrolled through the emails, I realized Marcus wasn't just giving bad financial advice, he was actively scamming my father. The cryptocurrency company didn't exist. The investment platform was a fake website Marcus had created. He was literally stealing my parents' life savings while planning to marry their daughter. My hands were shaking as I read email after email of Marcus manipulating my dad using financial jargon to confuse him, creating fake progress reports showing imaginary gains. My dad, who'd worked double shifts at the factory for 30 years to build that retirement fund, was being played by the man my family thought was perfect. The most sickening part was how Marcus wrote about our family in those emails. He called my dad easy prey and financially naive. He referred to Emma as his perfect cover and mentioned how the family's trust made the scam almost too easy. There was even a particularly vile message where he laughed about how the unemployed daughter me was too pathetic to be a threat to his plan. I screenshot everything, my mind racing. This wasn't just theft. This was a complete betrayal of everything my family thought they knew about this man. But here's what really twisted the knife. I realized my parents had been so blinded by their love for Marcus and their disappointment in me that they'd never see the truth coming from me. I was the family failure, the one who couldn't keep a job, the one who always caused drama. If I accused their precious future son-in-law of being a con artist, they'd think I was just jealous. I spent hours that night researching Marcus online, using every tool I'd learned in my marketing job. What I found was terrifying. Marcus Richardson wasn't even his real name. His actual name was Michael Roberts, and he had a history of financial fraud in 2 other states. He'd done this before, targeting middle-class families through romantic relationships. There were court records, bankruptcy filings, even a restraining order from a previous victim's family. The man my sister was going to marry was a professional con artist, and I had proof. But I also knew that if I went to my family with this information, they'd find ways to discredit me. They'd say I was lying out of jealousy, that I was trying to sabotage Emma's happiness because I couldn't stand seeing her succeed where I'd failed. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be the messenger they could shoot. Instead, I was going to let Marcus destroy himself, but I was going to make sure everyone saw exactly who he really was when he did it. I started planning using every skill I'd developed in marketing, every understanding of psychology I'd gained from years of being the family outsider. I created fake email accounts and began documenting everything. I researched the legal implications, figured out how to report the fraud to authorities in a way that would stick. But most importantly, I started planning for that dinner, the engagement celebration, where Marcus would feel so confident, so secure in his deception, that he'd show his true colors in front of everyone. Because here's what Marcus didn't understand about me. Being underestimated, your whole life teaches you to be strategic. Being dismissed and belittled makes you observant. And being hurt by the people who should love you most gives you a clarity that others don't have. I wasn't going to be the family disappointment who ruined Emma's engagement with wild accusations. I was going to be the one who watched Marcus hang himself with his own rope in front of the very people he was stealing from. The dinner wasn't going to be his moment of triumph. It was going to be his downfall. And I was going to make sure that when the truth came out, everyone would remember exactly how they'd treated me, exactly whose side they'd chosen, and exactly what their perfect Marcus had really thought of them all along. The 2 weeks between my discovery and the engagement dinner were the most calculating period of my life. While my family continued treating me like their charity case, asking when I was going to get my act together and find a job, I was methodically building the case that would expose Marcus for exactly what he was. But I had to be smart about it. I couldn't just dump evidence and expect them to believe me. These were people who'd spent months telling me I needed to be more like Emma, more responsible, more trustworthy. In their eyes, I was the one with credibility issues, not their golden boy Marcus. So I started playing a different game entirely. I began acting impressed by Marcus, asking him questions about his business success and investment strategies. The beautiful thing about con artists is their ego. They can't resist showing off, even to people they consider beneath them. Marcus started explaining his financial expertise to me, probably thinking it was hilarious that the family failure was seeking his advice. During one particularly sickening conversation, he actually suggested I let him help me invest the small amount of money I had left from my severance package. He said it with this condescending smile, like he was doing me such a favor. I played along, acting grateful and naive while secretly recording every word on my phone. I also started paying attention to family dynamics in a way I never had before. I noticed how my parents' entire faces would light up when Marcus entered a room, how they'd ask his opinion on everything from politics to home repairs. I watched Emma look at him with complete adoration, planning their future together, talking about the house they'd buy with his investment income. It was during this observation period that I made another chilling discovery. My mom had started asking Marcus for advice about their finances too. Not just my dad's retirement fund. She was considering letting Marcus help optimize their entire financial portfolio. They were going to give him access to everything. The worst part was watching how Marcus treated Emma when he thought no one else was paying attention. I caught subtle moments of manipulation. How he'd dismiss her opinions, make small comments about her appearance, control what she ordered at restaurants by suggesting she was watching her figure. The man my family thought was perfect was actually controlling and emotionally abusive, but he was so smooth about it that even Emma didn't recognize it as manipulation. That's when I realized this wasn't just about exposing a financial fraud. This was about saving my sister from a man who would destroy her life in every possible way. But I also knew that if I tried to point out his emotional manipulation, Emma would defend him even harder. She was already so invested in this relationship, so proud of landing the perfect guy, that any criticism would seem like an attack on her judgment. I started researching his previous victims more thoroughly, using my marketing research skills to track down women he'd scammed before. What I found was a pattern that made me sick to my stomach. Marcus didn't just steal money, he systematically destroyed women's self-esteem. isolated them from their families, then disappeared with everything they had when the scam ran its course. One woman, Sarah, agreed to talk to me over the phone. Her story was identical to what I was watching happen to Emma. Marcus had love-bombed her, impressed her family, convinced them to invest their savings, then gradually made her doubt her own worth while stealing everything they had. When the truth came out, her family blamed her for bringing him into their lives. She lost everything: her money, her confidence, and her relationship with her family. "He's so good at making everyone love him first," Sarah told me, her voice still shaky even 2 years later. "By the time you realize what's happening, he's already convinced everyone that you're the problem." When I tried to tell my family who he really was, they thought I was having a breakdown. That conversation crystallized my strategy. I couldn't be the one to expose Marcus. That would just make me the villain in their story. Marcus had to expose himself in a way that was so undeniable, so public, that my family couldn't explain it away or blame me for it. I started planning the perfect trap. I knew Marcus's ego was his weakness, and I knew exactly how to exploit it. The engagement dinner would be the perfect setting. Marcus would be feeling triumphant, surrounded by the family he was actively stealing from, celebrating his successful manipulation. He'd be relaxed, overconfident, and most importantly, he'd feel completely secure in his position as the family favorite. I spent days crafting the perfect provocation. I needed something that would make him show his true colors in front of everyone, something that would trigger his need to assert dominance and reveal his contempt for our family. Based on my research into his personality patterns and my observation of how he treated people he considered inferior, I knew exactly which buttons to push. The plan was risky because it required me to become the target of his cruelty, to let him humiliate me in front of my family. But I was willing to take that hit because I knew it would be temporary. Once Marcus revealed who he really was, once the evidence came out, everyone would see that his treatment of me was just a preview of how he really felt about all of them. I prepared my evidence carefully: screenshots, recordings, research on his real identity, documentation of the fake investment platform. I contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and prepared a formal complaint. I even reached out to a local investigative journalist who specialized in financial fraud cases. But most importantly, I prepared myself emotionally for what was coming. I knew that dinner was going to be brutal. I knew Marcus was going to hurt me in front of my family, and I knew they were going to let him. But I also knew it would be worth it when the truth finally came out. As I sat in my childhood bedroom the night before the dinner, looking at all the evidence spread out on my desk, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: power. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the victim of my family's dysfunction. I was going to be the architect of their awakening. The engagement dinner was set for Saturday evening at Chez Laurent, the fancy French restaurant where my parents had celebrated their 25th anniversary. Marcus insisted on making the reservation, probably because he knew it would impress everyone with his generosity, while actually using money he'd stolen from my father's retirement account. I spent the afternoon preparing, but not in the way my family expected. While they probably assumed I was trying to look presentable for once, I was actually setting up the technical aspects of my plan. I had my phone configured to record everything, a backup recording device in my purse, and I'd already sent copies of all my evidence to a secure cloud storage account with instructions to release everything if something happened to me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, the supposed family failure, orchestrating the most sophisticated operation any of us had ever attempted, while my successful family members were walking blindly into dinner with a Goffin, professional con artist. When I arrived at the restaurant, the whole family was already there. My parents looked happier than I'd seen them in years, my dad practically glowing as he shook Marcus's hand. Emma was radiant, showing off her engagement ring to anyone who'd look. Marcus looked exactly like what he was: a predator who'd successfully infiltrated his prey's den and was ready to enjoy his victory dinner. "Sarah," my mom called out, using the nickname that somehow always sounded slightly disappointed when it came from her. "Come meet Marcus's parents." This was news to me. I hadn't known Marcus's parents were coming. As I approached their table, I realized this was actually perfect for my plan. the more witnesses to what was about to happen, the better. Marcus's parents, Richard and Patricia, were clearly wealthy and polished. They greeted me with the kind of polite coolness that suggested Marcus had already primed them to see me as the family disappointment. The conversation flowed easily around me as everyone discussed wedding plans, Marcus's successful investments, and Emma's career. I played my part perfectly, staying quiet and looking appropriately intimidated by all the success surrounding me. I could see Marcus occasionally glancing at me with barely concealed smugness. In his mind, I was probably the perfect contrast to highlight his own accomplishments. The failure that made his success shine brighter. About halfway through dinner, as everyone was relaxed and the wine was flowing, I made my move. I'd been waiting for the perfect moment when Marcus was feeling most confident, and the conversation had lulled slightly. "Marcus," I said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "I've been thinking about what you said about investing my severance money. Could you explain again how your system works? I'm still not sure I understand it completely." The question was perfectly innocent on the surface, but I knew what it would trigger. Marcus couldn't resist the opportunity to show off his expertise, especially in front of his parents and mine. What he didn't realize was that I was giving him rope to hang himself with. "Of course, Serafina," he said with that condescending smile I'd grown to hate. "Though honestly, I'm not sure you'd really understand the complexities involved. These are pretty sophisticated financial instruments." "I'd like to try," I said, maintaining my innocent tone. "Maybe you could keep it simple for me." That's when he took the bait completely. Marcus launched into this elaborate explanation of his investment strategy, using big words and complex concepts, clearly trying to overwhelm me while impressing everyone else at the table. But what he was actually doing was describing in front of witnesses the exact scam he was running on my father. As he talked, I watched my dad nodding along proudly, completely unaware that Marcus was essentially confessing to stealing his life savings. Emma looked adoringly at her fiancé, so impressed by his financial acumen. Even Marcus's parents seemed pleased by their son's apparent expertise. "The beauty of cryptocurrency arbitrage," Marcus continued, getting more animated, "is that most people are too risk-averse, or frankly, too intellectually limited, to understand the opportunity. It takes a certain level of sophistication to see the potential." "Wow," I said, still playing dumb. "It sounds almost too good to be true. Are there any risks?" That's when Marcus made his fatal mistake. His ego was so inflated by the audience's admiration that he couldn't resist taking a shot at me. "Risks?" he laughed, looking around the table as if sharing a joke with the adults while a child asked naive questions. "Serafina, that's exactly the kind of thinking that keeps people like you stuck in minimum-wage jobs while people like me build wealth. You're so afraid of taking chances that you'll never amount to anything." The table went quiet for just a moment, but then my dad actually chuckled. "She's always been our cautious one," he said, as if that explained and excused Marcus's insult. But Marcus wasn't done. He was on a roll now, feeling powerful and untouchable. "I mean, let's be honest," he continued, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. "Look at where playing it safe has gotten you, Sarah. You're 26 years old, living with your parents, can't even hold down a job at some startup that probably failed because of employees like you." Now everyone was laughing. Not uncomfortable laughter, but genuine amusement, at my expense. My mother was actually nodding along, my father was grinning, and even Emma looked like she thought her fiancé was being charmingly honest rather than cruel. "The problem with people like you," Marcus continued, clearly enjoying himself, "is that you think being mediocre is some kind of virtue. You've never taken a real risk, never pushed yourself, never tried to be anything more than average. And then you wonder why successful people like Emma and me are passing you by." He gestured grandly around the table. "I mean, everyone here has achieved something with their lives. Your parents built a stable marriage and raised a daughter who became a nurse. Well, one daughter who became a nurse. They own their home, they've saved for retirement, they've built something meaningful." The way he said "one daughter" while looking directly at me made my stomach turn, but I kept my expression neutral. Emma is literally saving children's lives every day while building a future with someone who can provide for her. My parents built a successful business. Even I've created wealth and opportunities, not just for myself but for families like yours who are smart enough to trust my expertise. He paused dramatically, clearly building to his grand finale. And then there's you, Sarah. What exactly have you contributed? What do you bring to this family? Besides disappointment and excuses, you're like dead weight dragging everyone else down with your negativity and your fear of actually trying to succeed. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone at the table was staring at me, waiting to see how the family failure would react to this brutal but honest assessment. Marcus looked triumphant, probably thinking he'd just delivered the perfect reality check that would finally motivate me to get my life together. What none of them realized was that Marcus had just given me exactly what I needed. In his arrogance, he'd revealed his true nature to everyone who mattered. And thanks to the recording devices I had running, I now had permanent evidence of exactly how the perfect son-in-law really felt about the family he was stealing from. I looked around the table at all their expectant faces, took a deep breath and smiled. I smiled at Marcus, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, placing it deliberately on the table where everyone could see it. You know what, Marcus? You're absolutely right about one thing. I have been playing it safe. But not anymore. I opened my phone and pulled up the first screenshot, the email where Marcus called my dad easy prey. I turned the screen toward him, watching his face drain of color as he recognized his own words. I found something interesting while job hunting on my dad's laptop 2 weeks ago, I said conversationally as if we were discussing the weather. Turns out you've been having some very enlightening conversations with my father about investments. Marcus's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how much I knew, how much damage I could do. What is she talking about? Emma asked, looking between us with growing confusion. Instead of answering her, I looked directly at Marcus. Why don't you explain to everyone what cryptocurrency arbitrage really means? And while you're at it, maybe you could tell them about Michael Roberts. The name hit him like a physical blow. His face went completely white and I saw his hands start to shake slightly. Around the table, my family members were looking increasingly confused and concerned. I don't know what you're talking about, Marcus said, but his voice cracked on the words. Really? I pulled up another screenshot, his real identity from the court records. Because Michael Roberts knows exactly what I'm talking about. So do Sarah Patterson, Jennifer Walsh, and Maria Santos, the other women whose families you scammed before you found ours. I started reading from my phone, my voice clear and steady. Email from Marcus Richardson to James Morrison dated 3 months ago. The old man is even easier than I expected. He actually thanked me for the opportunity to invest his retirement savings. These blue-collar types are so grateful when someone like me pays attention to them. They don't ask the right questions. My father's face went from confusion to dawning horror. What retirement savings, Sarah? What is this? I kept reading. The daughter Emma is perfect cover, sweet, trusting, completely devoted. The family dynamics are ideal, with the unemployed sister as the perfect scapegoat if anything goes wrong. They already see her as the problem child, so if suspicions arise, she'll be the natural target for blame. Emma made a small, wounded sound. Marcus, what is she talking about? But I wasn't done. I pulled up the fake investment website on my phone and showed it to my father. Dad, remember that cryptocurrency platform Marcus showed you? The one where you've been watching your money grow for the past 3 months? My father took my phone with trembling hands, staring at the screen. This shows I have $450,000. My initial investment plus gains. It's fake, Dad. The entire website is fake. Marcus created it to make you think your money was growing while he was actually stealing it. None of that money exists anymore. The explosion of voices around the table was immediate and chaotic. Emma was demanding explanations from Marcus. My parents were asking frantic questions. Marcus's parents looked horrified. But through it all, I kept my eyes on Marcus, watching him realize that his perfect scam was crumbling around him. You have no proof, he said desperately, but I could see him calculating escape routes, wondering if he could still salvage this. That's when I played my ace. I opened the voice recording app on my phone, the one that had been running throughout dinner, and rewound to his earlier comments about me. Actually, Marcus. Or should I call you Michael? I have hours of recordings. including the conversation we had last week where you offered to help me invest my severance money using the exact same fake platform you used to steal from my father. I pressed play, and his voice filled the restaurant. The beauty of this system, Sarah, is that most people are too stupid to understand how sophisticated it really is. Your dad, for instance, he thinks he's getting investment advice, but really, he's just funding my lifestyle while I plan my exit strategy. The recording had been from a conversation the week before when I'd gotten him alone and deliberately provoked him into revealing details about his scam. He'd been so arrogant, so confident that I was too pathetic to be a threat, that he'd essentially confessed everything. Emma stood up so suddenly her chair fell backward. You recorded him, she said, but she wasn't angry at me. She was staring at Marcus with growing understanding. Is this real? Did you really say these things? Marcus tried to grab for my phone, but I was ready for that. I'd already uploaded everything to the cloud and I had backup devices. More importantly, I'd sent everything to the FBI that morning. The federal investigation started this morning, I announced calmly. I filed a complete report with the Financial Crimes Division, including documentation of your previous scams in Ohio and Nevada. They're very interested in your pattern of targeting middle-class families through romantic relationships. That's when Marcus finally cracked completely. You stupid bitch, he screamed, loud enough that other diners turned to stare. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed everything I've destroyed. What exactly? I asked quietly. Your ability to steal from my family, your fake relationship with my sister, your non-existent investment company. He lunged toward me, but my father, despite being 70 and still in shock, moved faster than I'd ever seen him move. He grabbed Marcus by the arm and threw him back into his chair with surprising force. Don't you dare touch my daughter, my dad said, his voice shaking with rage. You stole from us. You were going to marry Emma and you were stealing from us. The restaurant manager approached our table, clearly concerned about the disturbance, but I waved him away. We're handling a family matter, but it'll be resolved shortly. Marcus's parents, who had been silent through most of this, finally spoke up. His father looked at him with disgust. Michael, is this true? Are you running scams again? Again? The word hung in the air like a confession. Emma sat back down heavily, her face pale and shocked. Your name isn't even Marcus, Emma. I can explain everything he started, but she held up her hand to stop him. No, she said quietly. You can't. Because you just called my sister a bitch for exposing the fact that you were stealing from our parents. You can't explain that away. I looked around the table at my family. Really looked at them. My parents were holding hands, both crying quietly as they processed the magnitude of what had almost happened to them. Emma was staring at her engagement ring like it had turned into a snake. Marcus's parents looked mortified and were clearly planning their own escape. And Marcus himself looked exactly like what he was, a cornered con artist whose perfect scam had been demolished by the person he'd most underestimated. The silence following Emma's words stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Marcus, Michael, whatever his real name was, sat there looking around the table, desperately searching for any ally, any foothold he could use to regain control of the situation. You don't understand, he said, his voice taking on a wheedling tone I'd never heard before. Sarah's been jealous of Emma since day one. She's been looking for ways to sabotage our relationship because she can't stand seeing her sister happy. But something had fundamentally shifted in the room's dynamic. The spell he'd cast over my family was broken, and every word out of his mouth now sounded hollow and manipulative instead of charming and authoritative. Stop talking, Emma said, quietly still, staring at her ring. Just stop talking. My mother, who had spent months praising Marcus and criticizing me, was looking at him with dawning recognition. The things you said about our family in those emails. Is that really how you see us, Marcus? Tried to pivot again. Patricia, those messages were taken out of context. Sarah's obviously manipulated them somehow. You know how these computer files can be altered. I called the FBI office this morning, I interrupted. Agent Rodriguez is very familiar with your work, Michael. Apparently you've been on their radar since the Nevada incident, and they've been waiting for you to surface again. They're quite interested in your pattern of targeting families through daughters in healthcare professions. The specificity of that detail hit Emma like a physical blow. You specifically targeted families with daughters who are nurses. Marcus's father stood up abruptly. That's enough. Patricia, we're leaving. Now. Richard, wait, Marcus pleaded, but his father's expression was ice cold. No. We bailed you out after Nevada. We paid your legal fees, we helped you start over with a new identity, and you promised us you were done with this. We're not doing this again. The revelation that his own parents had enabled his previous scams added another layer of betrayal to an already devastating situation. Emma pulled her engagement ring off and placed it on the table with a small final-sounding click. How many? She asked quietly. What? How many women, how many families have you done this to? Marcus looked around the table one more time, perhaps calculating whether he could still salvage anything from this wreckage. But there was nothing left to salvage. The FBI was involved, his parents were abandoning him, and my family had seen him for exactly what he was. Does it matter? He said, his voice turning bitter and cold. You people were marks from day one. Your father practically begged me to take his money, your mother hung on my every word like I was some kind of prophet, and Emma. He looked at my sister with undisguised contempt. Emma was so desperate to seem successful that she would have married anyone who looked good on paper. My father started to stand, his face flushed with rage, but I put a gentle hand on his arm. Don't. He's not worth it. And besides, Agent Rodriguez specifically asked me to make sure we didn't do anything that could compromise their case. The mention of the FBI seemed to finally penetrate Marcus's arrogance. For the first time since I'd started exposing him, he looked genuinely afraid. You called the FBI before you even talked to us, my mother asked, and I could hear something like respect in her voice. I called them this morning after I'd gathered enough evidence to make sure they could build a solid case. But Mom, I've been investigating this for 2 weeks. I needed to be absolutely certain before I brought it to the family, because I knew how much you all trusted him. Emma looked up at me for the first time since the dinner began. You knew for 2 weeks, and you didn't tell me. If I had told you 2 weeks ago, would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was jealous and trying to sabotage your happiness? The honesty of the question hung in the air. Emma considered it, really considered it, and I could see her remembering every conversation where she'd dismissed my concerns about Marcus, every time she'd told me I just didn't understand successful men, every time she'd suggested I was jealous of her perfect relationship. You're right, she admitted quietly. I wouldn't have believed you. I would have thought you were being the difficult sister again. Marcus's phone started buzzing insistently. He glanced at it and his face went even paler. I have to go, he said, standing up quickly. Actually, I said conversationally, Agent Rodriguez mentioned they might want to talk to you this evening. Something about assets and bank account seizures. I'd probably stay reachable if I were you. The phone buzzed again, and this time Marcus looked at it with obvious panic. Whatever message he was receiving was clearly not good news for him. This isn't over, he said, looking directly at me with undisguised hatred. Actually, it is, I replied calmly. The FBI has everything they need, my family knows who you really are, and your scam is finished. The only question now is whether you're going to make this easier or harder on yourself. Marcus grabbed his coat and stormed away from the table, but not before I heard him mutter under his breath. Fucking bitch thinks she's so smart. I heard that my father said loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear. And if you ever speak about my daughter that way again, FBI case or no FBI case, we're going to have a problem. The protective anger in my dad's voice was something I hadn't heard directed toward me in years. It was simultaneously heartwarming and heartbreaking. Heartwarming because he was finally defending me. Heartbreaking because it had taken this extreme situation for him to see me as someone worth defending. Marcus left without another word, his parents following quickly behind him after offering mortified apologies to our table. The restaurant had mostly emptied around us, and I realized we'd been having this confrontation for over an hour. We should probably go, I said quietly. But nobody moved. We all sat there in the wreckage of what was supposed to have been a celebration, trying to process what had just happened. Sarah, my mom said, finally, how did you know to look for all this? How did you know what to search for? Because I said, simply being the family disappointment taught me to pay attention. When everyone expects you to fail, you learn to watch more carefully, to notice things other people miss. I saw things about Marcus that didn't add up, but I knew nobody would listen to me unless I had absolutely undeniable proof. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new apartment, the one I could afford after landing a fantastic job with a cybersecurity firm that specifically hired me because of my investigative skills, watching the local news report. On Marcus's sentencing, Michael Roberts received 8 years in federal prison for wire fraud, identity theft, and running a multi-state investment scam. The reporter mentioned that my family's case was what finally brought him down, though they kept our names private. My phone buzzes with a text from Emma. Saw the news. Are you watching? Yep, I text back. Justice feels pretty sweet. The relationship with my family has been complicated since that dinner. There was no magical moment where everything suddenly became perfect, no tearful apology scene where they begged my forgiveness and acknowledged how wrong they'd been about me. Real life doesn't work that way. But there have been changes. Small ones at first, then bigger ones as time passed, and they had to confront some uncomfortable truths about how they'd treated me for years. My dad was the first to really grapple with it. The FBI recovered about 60% of his retirement money from Marcus's various accounts, but the emotional impact of realizing how close he'd come to losing everything was devastating. More than that, though, was his growing understanding of how his dismissiveness of me had made the scam possible. If we'd listened to you more over the years, he told me about a month after the dinner, maybe we would have noticed the red flags. Maybe we would have trusted your judgment when it mattered. It wasn't a full apology, but it was acknowledgement, which was more than I'd expected. My mother took longer to come around. She'd been so invested in the idea of Emma's perfect relationship, so proud of having a daughter who'd landed such a successful man, that facing the reality of what Marcus was meant, confronting some deeply held beliefs about success and worth. But gradually she started asking about my new job, started treating my opinions as valid, started seeing me as someone who might actually know things worth knowing. Emma and I have probably changed the most. The hero worship she'd felt for Marcus had been replaced by a kind of cautious respect for me, but also some resentment that took time to work through. She'd felt humiliated by how completely she'd been fooled, and initially some of that embarrassment got directed at me for being the one to expose it. I keep wondering what people think, she confessed during one of our coffee meetings. Like, how could I not know? How could I be so stupid? You weren't stupid, I told her. You were targeted by someone whose literal profession was manipulating people. He studied you, Emma. He researched what kind of woman you were and what you wanted, and then he became exactly that person. That's not stupidity, that's being human. Those conversations were hard, but necessary. We had to rebuild our relationship from scratch, based on who we actually were, rather than the roles our family had assigned us. Turns out, when Emma wasn't trying to be the perfect daughter, and I wasn't playing the part of the family screw-up, we actually liked each other quite a bit. The most unexpected change came from my parents' marriage. Nearly losing their life savings to a con artist forced them to have conversations about money, trust, and decision-making that they'd been avoiding for decades. Dad had to admit he'd been making major financial decisions without really consulting Mom, and she had to acknowledge that she'd been deferring to his judgment even when her instincts told her something was wrong. We're in counseling now, my mom told me recently. After 32 years of marriage, we're finally learning how to actually communicate with each other. As for me, the experience taught me something invaluable about the difference between being underestimated and being undervalued. For years I'd internalized my family's assessment of me as somehow deficient, someone who couldn't quite get her life together. But exposing Marcus's scam showed me that many of the qualities they'd seen as weaknesses, my skepticism, my tendency to ask uncomfortable questions, my outsider perspective, were actually strengths. The cybersecurity firm hired me specifically because I think like someone who's been marginalized. I notice things that don't belong, patterns that don't quite fit, people whose stories don't add up. Turns out, those skills are incredibly valuable in a world full of digital predators. I've also built something I never had growing up, a chosen family. My coworkers, my new friends, the community I've found in my neighborhood. These are people who see me clearly and value what I bring to their lives. They don't compare me to anyone else or expect me to fit into predetermined roles. They just appreciate me for who I am. But here's what I want to know from all of you watching this story unfold. Have you ever been in a situation where your family couldn't see your worth until someone from outside validated it? Have you experienced that moment when the people who should know you best suddenly realize they've been underestimating you all along? And here's the bigger question. Do you think families ever really change their fundamental dynamics? Or do crisis situations just reveal who people have always been underneath? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear your stories about family dynamics, unexpected vindication, and those moments when the truth finally comes out. Hit that like button if you've ever felt like the family outsider who saw things others missed. And make sure to subscribe, because trust me, life has a way of serving up justice in the most unexpected ways, and I love sharing those stories with people who understand what it's like to be underestimated. Share this video with anyone who's ever been the family scapegoat, or the one who asks uncomfortable questions. Sometimes we need reminders that being different isn't being wrong, and that the qualities that make us outsiders can also be the qualities that save the day. Thank you for watching my story, and remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just living well enough that you can offer grace to the people who couldn't see you clearly when it would have been easier to do so. Justice has its own timeline, and truth has its own power.